They laughed when he chose the weakest alien girl. Then she returned as a legend. The selection. The observation deck of Nexus 7 hummed with barely contained energy as officers, dignitaries, and curiosity seekers gathered around the reinforced viewing platform. Below them, in the sterile confines of the detention bay, 17 alien prisoners stood in formation, the spoils of the recent Outer Rim conflicts. Each represented a different species, a different world brought under human dominion through superior firepower and strategic brilliance. Commander Zane Blackwood stood apart from the crowd, his weathered hands clasped behind his back as he studied the assembled captives. At 43, he bore the marks of 2 decades in deep space warfare. A cybernetic left eye that glowed faintly blue, replacing the one he'd lost in the Titan Nebula campaign, and a network of surgical scars across his neck where enemy shrapnel had nearly ended his career. His reputation preceded him, a tactical genius with an unsettling habit of making choices that defied conventional wisdom. "Quite the collection this time, Commander," Admiral Cortez remarked, her crisp uniform reflecting the harsh white lights of the observation deck. "The Valorian High Command has outdone themselves. Each prisoner represents a significant strategic asset." Blackwood's remaining organic eye swept across the detention bay below. There was Nyx, a hulking Chrythonian whose copper-colored exoskeleton could deflect plasma rounds. Beside him stood Zenith, a crystalline whose translucent body could refract energy weapons into devastating light shows. Other specimens displayed equally impressive physical attributes: claws that could rend steel, natural armor plating, or bioluminescent organs that suggested advanced sensory capabilities. "The selection protocols remain unchanged," Cortez continued, consulting her holographic tablet. "Each commander chooses one prisoner to serve as their personal apprentice and tactical advisor. The aliens' loyalty is guaranteed through the neural compliance chip, and their unique abilities will enhance your operational effectiveness," the crowd murmured with anticipation. This ceremony had become something of a spectacle among the military elite, part tradition, part entertainment. Commanders typically chose based on obvious physical prowess or demonstrated combat skills from battlefield recordings. "Commander Thorne selected the Drakmarian last season," someone whispered behind Blackwood. "Tripled his unit's effectiveness in close-quarters combat." "Smart choice. Look at the size of that thing." Blackwood tuned out the chatter, his attention drawn to the far corner of the detention bay where a slight figure sat cross-legged on the floor, seemingly oblivious to the scrutiny above. She appeared humanoid at first glance: 2 arms, 2 legs, a recognizable torso and head. But subtle differences marked her as distinctly alien. Skin with a faint, iridescent quality that shifted between pale blue and silver depending on the light. And most notably, elongated cranial ridges that swept back from her forehead like delicate fins. Unlike the other prisoners who stood at attention or prowled restlessly within their designated spaces, this one sat perfectly still, her eyes closed in what might have been meditation. She wore the standard detention jumpsuit, but it hung loose on her small frame, emphasizing how physically unremarkable she appeared compared to her fellow captives. The Mindari female registered the lowest combat efficiency scores during initial processing, Cortez noted, following Blackwood's gaze. Lyra Voss, according to her identification records: minimal physical strength, no apparent natural weapons, no demonstrated tactical knowledge. The assessment team recommended her for non-combat support roles only. "Interesting," Blackwood murmured. The selection process began with the junior commanders. They made predictable choices: the largest, the most obviously dangerous, the ones with the most impressive combat records. Each selection drew approving nods from the crowd and satisfied smiles from the choosing commanders. Finally, Cortez called Blackwood's name. As the most senior officer present, his choice would be the most scrutinized, the most discussed in the corridors and mess halls of Nexus 7 for weeks to come. The crowd fell silent as Blackwood stepped forward to the console that would transmit his selection to the detention bay below. His fingers hovered over the interface where holographic displays showed detailed specifications for each remaining prisoner. "Take your time, Commander," Cortez said with barely concealed smugness. Though, I should mention that the Chrythonians' exoskeleton specifications are quite remarkable. Enhanced strength, natural armor, proven combat adaptability. Blackwood's cybernetic eye whirred softly as it focused on the detention bay. Through its enhanced sensors, he could see what others missed. The subtle way Lyra's breathing remained, perfectly controlled despite the stress of the situation. The micro-expressions that suggested she was far more aware of her surroundings than her closed eyes indicated. "Commander Blackwood," Cortez prompted, a note of impatience creeping into her voice. "Your selection?" The crowd leaned forward expectantly. Blackwood's choices had become legendary, sometimes brilliant, occasionally disastrous, always unexpected. But this time surely he would make the obvious choice, the sensible choice. "Lyra Voss," he said clearly. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the ambient hum of the station's life support systems. Then the whispers began, confused, skeptical, some openly mocking. "Did he say the Mindari? She's barely larger than a human child. Has he lost his mind?" In the detention bay below, Lyra's eyes opened, large dark eyes that seemed to hold depths of intelligence her files hadn't suggested. She looked up at the observation deck, her gaze finding Blackwood's as if guided by instinct. Admiral Cortez cleared her throat. "Commander, are you certain? The Mindari's assessment scores are irrelevant," Blackwood interrupted, his voice carrying the authority of 2 decades of command. "I've made my choice." The processing was swift, but tense. Within an hour, Lyra stood in Blackwood's private quarters aboard his ship, the Relentless, still wearing the detention jumpsuit but now fitted with the standard apprentice monitoring bracelet. The neural compliance chip remained inactive. Blackwood had specifically requested that feature be disabled. "You're probably wondering why I chose you," he said, pouring himself a cup of synthetic coffee from the dispenser built into his desk. Lyra stood at attention, though her posture suggested wariness rather than submission. "The question had occurred to me, Commander." Her voice carried a slight accent, musical, with unusual tonal qualities that made even simple words sound somehow significant. Blackwood gestured to a chair, and after a moment's hesitation, she sat. "Tell me about your world," he said. "Mindara was a peaceful planet," Lyra replied carefully. "We had no standing military, no weapons of mass destruction. When your forces arrived, resistance was limited. Yet you were captured in a combat zone." For the first time, something flickered across her features. Not quite a smile, but a subtle shift that suggested hidden depths. "I was in the wrong place at the wrong time." Blackwood activated his personal console, bringing up her capture report. "According to this, you were found in the ruins of a strategic communications facility that had been destroyed in a way our tactical analysts couldn't explain. No trace of conventional explosives, no energy weapon signatures, the entire structure simply collapsed." Lyra said nothing, but her hands tensed slightly in her lap. "The interesting thing about the Mindari," Blackwood continued, "is that your species is telepathic. Not strongly, more like an enhanced intuition, an ability to sense intentions and emotional states. But in rare individuals, the talent can be much more developed." "I don't know what you're implying, Commander." "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating it directly." He leaned forward, his cybernetic eye focusing on her with mechanical precision. "You brought down that communications facility. Somehow, some way, you did something that our best weapons couldn't accomplish. And everyone assumed you were the weakest prisoner because you don't look dangerous." The silence stretched between them, charged with unspoken possibilities. Finally, Lyra spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do you want from me?" Blackwood smiled, the first genuine expression of warmth he'd shown since the selection ceremony. "I want to see what happens when the galaxy's most underestimated being gets proper training." Outside the viewport, stars wheeled slowly past as the Relentless adjusted its course toward the training facilities of Kepler Station. Neither of them knew that this moment, this quiet conversation in a starship's quarters, would be remembered as the beginning of a legend that would reshape the balance of power across 3 star systems. The galaxy had laughed when Zane Blackwood chose the weakest alien prisoner. They wouldn't be laughing for long. The proving 6 months had transformed everything aboard the Relentless. What began as skeptical whispers among the crew had evolved into something approaching reverence as they witnessed Lyra's metamorphosis from timid prisoner to formidable operative. Her training sessions with Commander Blackwood had become the stuff of ship legend, not for their brutality, but for their impossible results. The bridge buzzed with controlled tension as Captain Reeves reviewed the mission parameters for the third time. A grizzled veteran with silver hair and suspicious eyes, he'd served under Blackwood long enough to respect the man's tactical genius, while questioning his sanity in equal measure. "Let me understand this correctly," Reeves said, his voice carrying the weight of barely contained disbelief. "You want to take a single apprentice, an alien who 6 months ago couldn't operate basic ship controls, into hostile territory to extract 300 hostages from a fortified mining colony." Blackwood stood before the tactical display, his cybernetic eye casting blue light across the holographic representation of Theta 9. The mining colony hung in space like a metallic tumor, its industrial platforms and habitat modules connected by a web of transport tubes. Intelligence reports showed it crawling with Crimson Syndicate mercenaries, the galaxy's most ruthless private military organization. "The hostages are researchers and their families," Blackwood replied calmly. "Taken when the Syndicate seized the colony's rare earth mining operations. Standard extraction protocols call for a full battalion and acceptable casualty rates of 30%. "Exactly my point," Reeves snapped. "This isn't a training exercise, Commander. The Syndicate has military-grade weapons, defensive positions, and no qualms about executing prisoners to make a point." From her position near the navigation console, Lyra observed the exchange without comment. The past months had changed her dramatically, not just in skill but in presence. She stood taller now, her movements precise and economical. The detention jumpsuit had been replaced by a custom tactical suit that accommodated her unique physiology while providing advanced sensor integration. Most notably, the uncertain prisoner who had sat cross-legged in the detention bay had been replaced by someone who radiated quiet confidence. "Captain Reeves raises valid concerns," she said, her musical voice cutting through the tension. "Perhaps we should review the alternative approaches." Blackwood activated the display controls, cycling through various tactical scenarios. Each showed devastating casualty projections for both rescuers and hostages. The Syndicate's position was virtually impregnable through conventional assault. "The primary challenge is their sensor network," Lyra continued, studying the holographic layout with professional intensity. "Overlapping coverage zones, redundant systems, automated defensive turrets linked to central command. Any large-scale approach will be detected long before reaching the habitat modules. Which is why Command wants to wait for reinforcements," Reeves interjected. "Let the 7th Fleet handle this properly." "The 7th Fleet won't arrive for 6 days," Blackwood replied. "Intelligence indicates the Syndicate plans to begin executing hostages in 48 hours to force colonial government compliance with their demands." Lyra moved closer to the display, her elongated cranial ridges shifting slightly, a subtle indicator Blackwood had learned to recognize as deep concentration. Her fingers danced over the controls, highlighting specific sections of the mining colony's structure. "There's another way," she said quietly. The bridge crew exchanged glances. Over the past months, Lyra's tactical insights had proven unnervingly accurate, but this seemed beyond even her demonstrated abilities. "Explain," Blackwood commanded. "The Mindari have a saying," Lyra began, her dark eyes reflecting the holographic light. "The strongest fortress becomes the weakest when its strength becomes its weakness. The Syndicate's sensor network is impressive, but it's designed to detect conventional threats, ships, energy weapons, large masses moving through space." She manipulated the display, focusing on the colony's power distribution systems. "But what if the threat wasn't conventional? What if it came from within their own defenses?" Captain Reeves frowned. "You're talking about sabotage. How do you propose getting inside without being detected?" Lyra's expression shifted into what Blackwood had come to recognize as her tactical mode, a transformation that made her alien. heritage suddenly apparent. Her skin's iridescence intensified, and her cranial ridges seemed to pulse with faint bioluminescence. The mining operations use automated cargo pods for ore transport, she explained. They follow predetermined routes through the sensor grid, tagged with identification codes that render them essentially invisible to security systems. You want to hide inside cargo containers? Reeves asked incredulously. Not hide, Lyra corrected. Become invisible. Commander Blackwood, what did you teach me about misdirection? The enemy sees what they expect to see, he replied, understanding beginning to dawn in his cybernetic eye. Exactly. We don't fight their defenses. We make their defenses work for us. The plan that emerged over the next hour was audacious to the point of madness. Using modified EVA suits equipped with holographic projectors, they would attach themselves to the exterior of cargo pods during routine transport runs. The holo projectors would create false sensor readings, making their life signs appear as standard cargo while masking their actual biological signatures. The technical challenges alone, Chief Engineer Vasquez muttered, running calculations on his portable console. The power requirements for sustained holographic concealment, the environmental seals, the timing coordination. 12 hours, Blackwood said firmly. I want full operational capability in 12 hours. As the crew dispersed to prepare, Reeves lingered on the bridge. Commander, I have to ask, what makes you so certain she can pull this off? Blackwood remained silent for a long moment, watching through the viewport as Lyra supervised the modification of their infiltration equipment. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a note of wonder that surprised even him. 6 months ago, she couldn't activate a door panel without triggering 3 different security protocols. Last week, she successfully interfaced with our entire ship's computer network simultaneously, not through the terminals, but through direct neural contact with the quantum processors. That's impossible. Human neural pathways can't process quantum-level data streams. She's not human, Blackwood replied simply, and I'm beginning to suspect that what we call impossible might just be a limitation of our own understanding. The infiltration began 18 hours later, with the Relentless, positioned in the sensor shadow of Theta 9's largest asteroid. 2 modified cargo pods drifted toward the mining colony, their trajectories carefully calculated to match routine ore transport patterns. Attached to the underside of each pod, barely visible against the dark metal hull, Lyra and Blackwood rode, their mechanical steeds through space. The holographic projectors hummed softly, creating false electromagnetic signatures that registered as standard cargo manifests to the Syndicate's sensors. Phase 1 complete, Lyra's voice whispered through the comm system. Approaching docking bay 7. The colony's automated systems guided the pods through a series of security checkpoints. Each scanner probe met with perfectly crafted false readings. Blackwood marveled at the precision required. Any deviation from expected parameters would trigger immediate alert protocols. Internal sensors are more sophisticated, he warned as they approached the docking mechanism. We'll have approximately 30 seconds to detach and reach the maintenance conduits before the bay's internal security scans activate. Understood. Beginning detachment sequence. Now. They separated from the pods with practiced efficiency, Lyra's movements displaying an almost supernatural grace as she navigated the complex geometry of the docking bay. Her cranial ridges pulsed rhythmically, a sign that she was accessing her enhanced sensory capabilities to map their environment in ways that conventional equipment couldn't match. The maintenance conduits were cramped, barely wide enough for a human form, filled with the constant hum of recycling systems and data conduits. They crawled through the colony's mechanical arteries, guided by blueprints and Lyra's increasingly uncanny ability to sense the structure's layout. Hostage location confirmed, she whispered, after interfacing directly with a data port. Habitat, Module 3, Levels 7 through 12, approximately 280 individuals. Guard disposition, 47 Syndicate personnel. Standard patrol patterns, but they've clustered their defensive positions around the primary access points. Conventional assault would require fighting through at least 20 hostile contacts. Blackwood consulted his tactical display. Alternative, routes. Lyra was quiet for several seconds, her bioluminescent ridges pulsing more rapidly. When she spoke again, her voice carried a note of something that might have been excitement. There's a way, but it requires trusting me completely. Explain. The colony's life support systems are centralized. Atmospheric processing, gravity, generation, even the lighting controls. Everything runs through the primary environmental computer. If I can establish a direct neural link with the system, the neural feedback could kill you. Blackwood interrupted. Colony-level computer. Systems aren't designed for biological interface. The data streams alone would overwhelm human consciousness. I'm not human, Lyra replied, echoing his earlier words. And I believe my people's telepathic abilities evolved for exactly this kind of integration. Let me become the colony's nervous system commander. Let me be your eyes and hands throughout the entire structure. The risk was enormous. If Lyra's consciousness was damaged or destroyed by the neural interface, not only would she be lost, but their entire mission would collapse. Yet as Blackwood studied her face through his cybernetic eyes' enhanced sensors, he saw something that decided him. Not desperation or reckless courage, but the calm certainty of someone who finally understood their true capabilities. Do it. What happened next would be analyzed in military academies for decades to come. Lyra's direct neural interface with the colony's environmental systems created something unprecedented, a fusion of biological intuition and technological precision that transformed her into something approaching omniscience within the colony's structure. Through her connection, she could sense every life sign, every heat signature, every electromagnetic pattern throughout the vast complex. More than that, she could control them. Lights dimmed and brightened in complex patterns that confused guard patrols. Gravity fluctuated in specific corridors, disorienting syndicate personnel. Atmospheric processors created localized fog clouds that provided perfect concealment for Blackwood's advance. Guard Patrol Alpha redirecting to maintenance level, Lyra's voice whispered directly into his consciousness, not through his comm system, but through some form of technological telepathy that should have been impossible. Clear path to hostage location in 30 seconds. Blackwood moved through the colony like a ghost, guided by an intelligence that seemed to anticipate every obstacle before it appeared. When guards approached, ventilation systems would suddenly activate, masking his movement sounds. When security cameras threatened to detect him, their feeds would experience precisely timed glitches that created blind spots in their coverage. The rescue itself was almost anticlimactic. Blackwood reached the hostage location to find the syndicate guards confused and disoriented by a series of false alarms and system malfunctions that had scattered their attention across the entire colony. He disabled the few remaining sentries with surgical precision, then began evacuating the prisoners through routes that Lyra cleared in real time. Evacuation pods prepared and secured, her voice announced as the last group of hostages reached the docking bays. Syndicate reinforcements, still delayed by environmental anomalies. The extraction was flawless. 283 hostages evacuated without a single casualty. The syndicate forces, thoroughly demoralized by their inexplicable technical failures, offered only token resistance as Blackwood's rescue fleet arrived to complete the operation. Back aboard the Relentless, as medical teams processed the freed prisoners and the crew celebrated their impossible victory, Captain Reeves found himself standing beside Lyra in the observation lounge. She appeared exhausted but triumphant, her cranial ridges still glowing faintly from her neural exertions. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "When the commander first chose you, I thought he'd lost his tactical judgment." Lyra smiled, a expression that transformed her alien features into something almost human. "And now? Now I think he might be the only one who saw clearly from the beginning." Through the viewport, they watched as the last evacuation ships departed from Theta 9, carrying grateful families back to safety. Word of the rescue was already spreading through the communication networks, the impossible mission accomplished by an aging commander and his alien apprentice. The galaxy had laughed when Zane Blackwood chose the weakest prisoner. They wouldn't make that mistake again. In the months and years that followed, The legend of Lyra Voss would grow beyond anything the spectators at Nexus 7 could have imagined. But it began here, in the quiet triumph of proving that strength comes not from what others expect, but from the courage to become more than anyone thought possible. The weakest had become the strongest, and the galaxy would never be the same.